Magic the Gathering has given us gods, dragons, and planeswalkers who can cross between dimensions with just a thought, but nothing in the entire multiverse is more terrifying than the Eldrazi. These aren't creatures in any traditional sense. They're cosmic horrors from outside reality itself, existing in the Blind Eternities, the void between planes, where they have no physical form, no color alignment, and show no mercy. They possess only hunger, endless, ceaseless, all-consuming hunger that can never be satisfied. 3 Titan-class Eldrazi were bound on Zendikar thousands of years ago. Ulamog, the infinite gyre, warps physical matter into white coral skeletal structures. Kozilek, the great distortion, bends reality itself, leaving colorful bismuth crystals in his wake. And Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn, transforms living flesh into lattice-work monstrosities of impossible biology. When these titans feed, entire plains die, mountains crumble to dust, and oceans evaporate into nothingness. This is their story, the imprisonment that should have lasted forever, the awakening that never should have happened, and the war to stop them that may have doomed the multiverse. It's also the revelation that destroying cosmic entities might carry consequences nobody can predict. If you like this video, please leave a like for it. It really does help the channel and it takes no time from you. Also, if you would subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date when we release more videos. Drop your comment down below. What is your favorite Eldrazi Titan? I would love to hear your answers in the comment section. This is the complete lore of the Eldrazi. Let's dive in. Understanding the Eldrazi requires first understanding that they don't belong to our reality. They exist in the Blind Eternities, the space between planes where only planeswalkers can normally travel. But unlike planeswalkers who need a spark to walk between worlds, the Eldrazi simply exist there naturally, formless and colorless, driven by an appetite that defines their entire existence. The spirit dragon Ugin once explained their nature with a simple metaphor that makes the incomprehensible slightly more graspable. Imagine a man sticking his hand into a pool of water. The man represents the Eldrazi Titan, while the water represents a plane of existence. The fish swimming in that water, the inhabitants of the plane, can only see the hand breaking the surface. They can't see the arm, the body, or the mind behind it, and they certainly can't comprehend the entity as a whole. When an Eldrazi Titan wants to feed, it extends part of itself into a plane, creating a physical manifestation that the plane's inhabitants can perceive and interact with. What we see walking across Zendikar or terrorizing Innistrad isn't the actual Eldrazi in its totality. It's just the hand reaching into the pool, while the true Titan exists outside our dimension, beyond our comprehension and our ability to truly fight it. The smaller Eldrazi that accompany these Titans aren't independent creatures leading their own lives. The drones, the spawn, the processors, they're all extension of the Titan's body, like fingers on that hand. They're all part of the same impossible entity, connected to a consciousness that exists partially outside our reality. During their first meeting, Ugin told the Planeswalkers, Nahiri and Sorin, that only 3 true Eldrazi Titans existed in the multiverse. These were Emrakul, Ulamog, and Kozilek. Whether that remains true today, or whether other Titans lurk in the depths of the Blind Eternities waiting for their chance to feed, remains unknown and deeply unsettling. Comment down below if you think Magic will ever reveal more Planeswalker Titans. Each Titan has developed its own method of consumption, its own signature that it leaves burned into reality itself. Ulamog's brood leaves behind white coral-like skeletal structures that are all that remain of consumed matter. These Eldrazi are characterized by bony masks covering their completely featureless heads and writhing tentacles that serve no apparent purpose. When Ulamog feeds, the physical properties of matter itself break down before our eyes. Stone crumbles to dust, flesh dissolves to ash, and everything solid becomes reduced to pale, lifeless remnants of what it once was. Kozilek's lineage leaves behind formations that closely resemble colorful bismuth crystals, geometric and impossible. These Eldrazi have multiple eyes scattered randomly across their bodies, rarely where you would expect to find them, rarely on their heads, and large black jagged plates that float around them in defiance of all natural laws. They don't just consume matter, they warp reality itself. Gravity fails in their presence. Space folds in on itself. The The fundamental laws of physics become more suggestions that Kozilek's brood can ignore at will. Emrakul's brood represents the most bizarre manifestation of Eldrazi consumption. They leave behind yellow dust and somehow transform entire landscapes into flesh and bone, as if the world itself becomes part of some massive organism. These creatures possess lattice-like flesh and unnatural hues that shouldn't exist. Bright purples, blues, and reds that hurt to look at. Many of them have no conventional forms whatsoever, lacking any discernible sensory organs or recognizable structure. They're just wrongness given shape and set loose upon the world. What makes the Eldrazi truly terrifying, however, isn't just their power or their hunger, it's that they're intelligent. Vastly, incomprehensibly intelligent, but in a way that's utterly alien to any mortal mind. The telepath, Jace Beleren, once managed to communicate with the conceptualization of Emrakul that manifested within his own mind while he was on Innistrad. The entity acknowledged that she hadn't even realized he existed as a separate being with its own consciousness. What Jace experienced during that contact was his mind desperately trying to comprehend something that was fundamentally incomprehensible, translating cosmic awareness into concepts a mortal brain could process without breaking. When the vampire Drana attacked one of Ulamog's larger spawn, she experienced disturbing visions that revealed that these creatures somehow knew they shouldn't be on Zendikar. They understood, on some level, that their imprisonment was wrong, that they didn't belong in this place. When General Tazri found herself caught in Kozilek's reality-warping field, she experienced a vision in which Kozilek obliterated the Gatewatch with casual ease. The Titan was aware of the planeswalkers threatening it. It perceived them as dangers and calculated how to eliminate them. The Eldrazi aren't mindless forces of destruction. There's something far more terrifying than that. They're aware, intelligent, and utterly indifferent to the lives they consume, like a human who doesn't consider the feelings of bacteria while washing their hands. Now that we have a base understanding of what the Eldrazi are, let's dive into their history throughout the course of Magic the Gathering. Thousands of years ago, 3 planeswalkers discovered the full scope of the Eldrazi threat to the multiverse. Sorin Markov, the ancient vampire lord who had walked the plains for millennia. Ugin, the spirit dragon whose understanding of magic surpassed nearly any other being. And Nahiri, the lithomancer from Zendikar who could shape stone itself with her mind. These 3 witnessed the Eldrazi consuming entire plains, devouring worlds whole, and leaving nothing but dust and silence behind. They understood that this couldn't be allowed to continue unchecked. The multiverse needed protection from these hungering titans, and they were the only ones who seemed capable of providing it. Sorin's initial instinct was to destroy the Eldrazi outright, to eliminate the threat permanently. Ugin, however, disagreed strongly with this approach. He warned his companions that destroying beings of such cosmic significance could have unforeseen and potentially catastrophic consequences. The Eldrazi, he believed, were somehow part of the multiverse's ecosystem, serving some purpose that mortals couldn't understand from their limited perspective. Instead of destruction, they would attempt something almost as ambitious: imprisonment. The plan they developed was both brilliant and terrible. They would force the Eldrazi into physical form, lure them to a single plane, and trap them there, permanently. They would sacrifice one world for the greater good of the entire multiverse. They needed a world with lush ecosystems and uniquely dynamic mana, something powerful enough to attract the Eldrazi's insatiable hunger and hold their attention. After careful consideration, they chose Nahiri's own home plane of Zendikar, a world of incredible magical power and natural beauty. Nahiri agreed to this sacrifice, understanding that her world would bear the burden of protecting all others. The 3 planeswalkers each contributed their unique abilities to create the prison. Nahiri built the foundation, constructing a massive network of stone hedrons that spread across the entire plane. These weren't ordinary stones, but rather conduits for magical energy, carefully arranged to channel Zendikar's natural ley lines into a prison that would bind the Eldrazi permanently to this single location. Sorin took on the dangerous task of luring the Titans to Zendikar. He directed their hunger toward the plane's unique mana signature, drawing them toward it like moss to a flame that would ultimately burn them. Ugin contributed his colorless breath, magic without any color alignment, as strange and alien as the Eldrazi themselves, to combat the Titans directly and bind them irrevocably to the plane itself. The three planeswalkers concentrated the full power of their imprisonment spell in a secret chamber buried deep within Zendikar's mountains, in a region called a Koum. They called this chamber the Eye of Ugin. To ensure the prison could never be accidentally opened by curious explorers or ambitious mages, they sealed it with an incredibly specific mystical lock. Only the presence of the three planeswalker sparks together, combined with Ugin's unique colorless breath, could reactivate the eye and potentially disturb the imprisonment. Their trap worked exactly as planned. Emrakul, Ulamog, and Kozilek manifested in physical form on Zendikar, drawn by the plane's rich mana. The Hedra network that Nahiri had constructed bound them in place. The imprisonment spell that all three planeswalkers had woven together forced the Titans into harmless dormancy, sleeping dreamlessly beneath Zendikar's surface. Their mission was complete, and the three planeswalkers went their separate ways. Sorin and Ugin left the plane to attend to their own affairs across the multiverse. Nahiri remained behind on her homeworld, accepting the responsibility of watching over the prison and protecting Zendikar from any potential disturbances to the Eldrazi slumber. For thousands of years, the Eldrazi slept undisturbed. Zendikar thrived above their prison, its civilizations growing and flourishing, and three planeswalkers believed they had successfully saved the multiverse from an existential threat. They were catastrophically wrong. A few thousand years after the successful imprisonment of the Titans, something began to go terribly wrong. The noxious creative force of Ulamog became an infection that seeped through the Hedra network like poison through veins. It began affecting the people who dared to live in Akoum's mountains despite the region's notorious tectonic instability and dangerous conditions. These affected people gradually transformed into a cult, but they didn't understand what was happening to them or why. They began worshipping an imagined deity of the mountains, creating elaborate mythologies around a god that existed only in their maddened minds. They established a temple near the site of the Eldrazi prison and began performing increasingly elaborate rituals inspired by the growing madness they couldn't comprehend. Nahiri, who had become increasingly reclusive over the centuries of her watch, failed to notice these cultists and their activities. Over multiple generations, their rituals proved disturbingly effective at weakening the bonds of the Eldrazi prison, though the cultists themselves had no idea what they were actually accomplishing. When the Hedra network was sufficiently disturbed, the prison that had held for thousands of years proved far more tenuous than anyone had believed. The Eldrazi didn't fully awaken, but a small fraction of their immense power managed to emerge from the prison. This partial awakening was enough to unleash legions of Eldrazi drones across Zendikar's surface. Among the very first creatures to awaken was an entity called Zuladak. Its name was first whispered into the minds of desperate cultists seeking communion with their imagined deity, then later screamed from the mouths of panicked victims as it ravaged the land. Zuladak raised everything in its path, marching across Zendikar with single-minded purpose, seeking anything that could satiate its terrible hunger. Mountains were crushed in its wake, splintered apart and carved out as if they were made of soft clay rather than solid stone. According to the records that survived, a single night of Zuladak's feeding carved out the entire shape of Windblast Gorge, once a towering mountain range, reduced to a deep canyon by one Eldrazi's appetite over the course of mere hours. The presence of Zuladak inspired a natural hunger and thirst in those nearby, cravings that could never be quenched no matter how much they consumed. It drove victims to turn on each other, consuming one another in desperate attempts to satisfy the hunger, always staying just ahead of the Eldrazi's relentless advance. This created a famine so powerful that it even affected Ulamog's own cultist followers, though they understood this all-consuming hunger as their god's gift to them and followed it willingly into death and destruction. The cultists who followed the path of carnage left by Zuladak and the other emerging Eldrazi saw firsthand the terrible power of consumption. They learned how to turn flesh and blood into power, how to sustain themselves through the life force of others. Only 12 of these cultists survived the initial wave of Eldrazi spawn emerging from the weakened prison. These 12 survivors became the first vampire blood chiefs, the progenitors of Zendikar's entire vampire race, a people literally born from exposure to Eldrazi essence. Nahiri finally noticed the catastrophe unfolding across her world. She immediately sent out a beacon calling for aid from her fellow planeswalkers, Sorin and Ugin, expecting them to respond as they had sworn they would when they created the prison together. Her call went unanswered. Neither Sorin nor Ugin came to help her. Alone and betrayed, Nahiri was forced to handle the crisis by herself. She identified the specific disturbances of the Hedron network and painstakingly repaired each one. She tracked down and slew Zolodok in single combat. Through tremendous effort and sacrifice, she managed to return the Eldrazi to their slumber, resealing the prison without the help of her supposed allies. But the damage had already been done and could never be undone. An entire race, the vampires, had been created by exposure to the Eldrazi's corrupting essence. For millennia afterward, vampires would whisper the name of Zolodok as a curse against Zendikar itself, a reminder of the night their entire species was born from cosmic horror. And Nahiri never forgot that when she needed them most, her allies had abandoned her and her world to face annihilation, all by herself. Thousands of years passed after the First Awakening. The Eldrazi slept undisturbed once again. Zendikar slowly recovered from the catastrophe, and new civilizations rose where old ones had fallen. The memory of Zolodok and the First Awakening faded into legend and myth. Then, 3 planeswalkers had an accidental meeting in the Eye of Ugin that would doom the entire plane. Sarkhan Vol arrived at the chamber, driven by the subtle manipulations of the Elder Dragon Nicobolas, though he didn't understand that he was being controlled. Chandra Nalaar came searching for a powerful scroll she'd been hired to retrieve, and Jace Beleren followed an investigation of the mysteries surrounding the chamber. None of them fully understood what the Eye of Ugin truly was or what terrible purpose it served. 3 planeswalker sparks in the Eye of Ugin at the same time. The mystical lock that had protected the prison for millennia registered their presence. The bonds keeping the Eldrazi in their torpor began to loosen and unravel. The Titans stirred from their ancient sleep, ready to feed once more. Across Zendikar, dormant stone hedrons that hadn't moved in thousands of years suddenly came to life. They began changing and combining into bizarre superstructures that defied logic, bending the fundamental laws of nature around them. A new generation of brood lineages shuddered into existence, emerging from the ground like a plague. Eldrazi drones poured forth from the earth itself, and deep beneath the surface, the 3 Titans began to truly awaken. The carnage was immediate and devastating. Entire settlements were consumed in hours. The Eldrazi swarm spread across Zendikar like a disease, leaving only destruction in their wake. Sorin Markov found himself drawn back to Zendikar by some deep instinct warning him that the prison was failing. When he arrived and saw what was happening, he realized with horror that his companions weren't there to help him. Ugin was believed dead, killed by Nicobolas on the plane of Tarkir during their ancient conflict. Nahiri was missing, and Sorin didn't know that he himself was the reason why. He had trapped her in the Hell Vault on Innistrad after she attacked his home plane in revenge for his abandonment during the First Awakening. Sorin desperately needed help to contain this disaster. He found it in an unlikely ally, Nissa Ravain, an elf planeswalker native to Zendikar who wanted nothing more than to save her dying world. Sorin explained the situation to Nissa as clearly as he could. The Eldrazi needed to be re-imprisoned immediately. Together, they could reinforce what remained of the Hedron network, repair the imprisonment spell, and force the Titans back into dormancy before they could fully manifest and consume the plane entirely. But Nissa had developed a completely different plan, one based on a misunderstanding of what the Eldrazi truly were. She believed that if she released the Eldrazi completely, shattering their bonds entirely, they would simply leave Zendikar behind. In her mind, the Titans were prisoners here, held against their will. If she set them free, surely they would flee into the Blind Eternities and never return to her world. Before Sorin could stop her, Nissa shattered the main Hedron anchoring the entire network. The enchantment prisoning the Titans broke completely, dissolving entirely. The Eldrazi were free. Nissa's assumption proved catastrophically wrong. The Eldrazi didn't flee Zendikar the moment they were released. Why would they? They had just woken up on the richest feeding ground in the entire multiverse, a plane overflowing with the exact type of mana they craved most. They had no reason to leave and every reason to stay and consume everything. Sorin, absolutely disgusted by Nissa's foolishness and her complete refusal to listen to his warnings or heed his wisdom, abandoned Zendikar entirely. He had his own business to attend to across the multiverse, and if Nissa wouldn't listen to reason, he saw no point in wasting his time trying to save her world or clean up her catastrophic mistake. Zendikar burned under the Eldrazi assault. and Nissa was forced to face the terrible consequences of her choice completely alone, watching her world die because of her very actions. Despite the magnitude of her mistake, Nissa didn't give up. She took up the fight against the Eldrazi with renewed determination, seeking to fix what she had broken. She was eventually joined by Chandra Nalaar, one of the planeswalkers who had accidentally helped free the Eldrazi in the first place and who felt responsible for the catastrophe. Gideon Jura arrived, seeking the kind of impossible battle that only a true hero could face, and Jace Beleren came investigating the mystery of what he and the others had accidentally unleashed upon this world. With crucial help from Jorian, a merfolk explorer who knew Zendikar's secrets better than almost anyone, they studied the remaining ley lines that connected the scattered Hedrons. They rallied what remained of Zendikar's defenders, humans, elves, merfolk, Kor, goblins, and every other race that had survived the Eldrazi onslaught, into a unified fighting force. As they worked together, the four planeswalkers began to realize something important about their situation. When they fought alone as individuals, they were essentially helpless against threats of this magnitude. But when they worked together as a coordinated team, combining their different abilities and supporting each other's weaknesses, they could potentially stand against nearly any force in the multiverse. They made a decision that would change the multiverse forever. They swore an oath to each other to stand together against threats that no single hero could face, and to protect the multiverse from dangers that required unified action. The Gatewatch was officially born in that moment. Their first mission as the Gatewatch was appropriately ambitious: slay the Eldrazi Titans permanently. Jace understood their situation clearly. They had already broken their promise to Ugin by allowing the Eldrazi to be freed from their prison. The Hedron network was shattered beyond any hope of repair. They couldn't re-imprison the Titans even if they wanted to. They couldn't allow the Titans to escape Zendikar either, because then they would simply move on to consuming other planes, spreading the devastation across the multiverse. Only one option remained that could actually solve the problem: kill the Titans. The Sea Planeswalker Kyra joined their fight, bringing with her the terrible power of Zendikar's oceans themselves. Together, the Gatewatch developed what they believed was a workable plan. Nissa would use her deep connection to Zendikar's ley lines to bind both Kozilek and Ulamog directly to the plane, pulling the bulk of the Titan's vast essence into physical form where it could potentially be attacked. Zendikar's remaining defenders would pose as bait, attracting the Titans to a specific location where the trap could be sprung. Gideon would hold the defensive line using his invulnerability magic, keeping the endless Eldrazi swarms from overwhelming the mortal army. Kyra would use her summoned sea creatures to clear out any additional threats that broke through. Chandra would provide magical support wherever it was needed most. And once the Titans were fully anchored to Zendikar, made vulnerable through Nissa's binding, the Gatewatch would strike with everything they had. The plan worked brilliantly, at first. Nissa successfully bound both Titans to Zendikar through the planet's leyline network. The massive Eldrazi manifestations appeared in physical form, drawn toward the defenders who were serving as bait. Gideon's invulnerability magic protected the assembled army from being instantly slaughtered. Kyra's ocean-born creatures fought off the smaller Eldrazi swarms that tried to flank them. But then, the critical flaw in their plan revealed itself in the worst possible way. The Titans, now anchored fully to Zendikar, began doing what they did best: consuming everything around them. Their destructive essence started assimilating the entire plane into themselves. Zendikar itself was being absorbed, converted, and destroyed from within by the very beings they had bound to it. Kyra panicked as she realized what was happening. She desperately tried to convince Nissa to release the binding spell, to let the Titans flee into the Blind Eternities before they could consume the entire plane. Better to lose track of the Titans than to lose Zendikar entirely, she argued. Jace immediately objected to this plan. If they released the Titans now, after going through all of this, the Eldrazi would simply go on to consume other worlds across the multiverse. Countless planes would fall. This had to end here, on Zendikar, no matter the cost. Chandra proposed a different solution, her voice cutting through the argument. "Let me burn them." Jace hesitated for only a moment before agreeing to try her plan. They were out of options, and out of time. The Pyromancer reached out and connected her magic with the Animist. Chandra channeled the full force of her pyromantic power through Nissa's connection to Zendikar's ley lines, pouring flames directly into the Titans through the planet itself. The fire didn't come from outside the Eldrazi, it erupted from within them, burning them from the inside out. One single brilliant stroke of purifying fire consumed them both. Ulamog and Kozilek were incinerated completely, utterly destroyed, reduced to nothing more than ashes that rained down from Zendikar's sky like snow. The Gatewatch had won an impossible victory. 2 Eldrazi Titans, beings that had existed since before recorded history, were dead. But when Ugin eventually learned what they had done, he was absolutely furious with them. He warned them gravely that destroying beings of such immense cosmic significance could have unforeseen and potentially catastrophic consequences that might not manifest for years or even centuries to come. The Eldrazi served some purpose in the multiverse's ecology that mortals couldn't understand. Killing them might have disrupted some fundamental balance in ways nobody could predict. The Gatewatch, flushed with their victory and confident in their abilities, largely ignored his warnings. They had saved Zendikar from certain destruction. That was what truly mattered in the moment. Meanwhile, the third and final Titan, Emrakul, was already gone from Zendikar, having left months before the Gatewatch was even formed. Emrakul had departed Zendikar months before the Gatewatch formed, and long before her fellow Titans were destroyed. She hadn't left randomly or fled in fear. She had been summoned to another plane by someone with a very specific and very personal revenge in mind. Nahiri, the lithomancer who had helped imprison the Eldrazi thousands of years ago, had finally escaped from the Hell Vault where Sorin had trapped her. When she emerged, she learned the full truth of what had happened. Sorin had imprisoned her while she was trying to reach him for help. He had ignored her desperate calls for aid during the first Eldrazi awakening. He had abandoned both her and Zendikar to face annihilation alone, breaking every promise he had made to her. Nahiri wanted revenge, and she knew exactly how to hurt Sorin in the way that would cause him the most pain. She traveled to his home planet of Innistrad and began constructing an elaborate cryptolith network using the same lithomancy techniques she had once used to help imprison the Eldrazi. But this network served the opposite purpose. It wasn't a prison, but rather a beacon. A summoning ritual designed to call one specific entity across the planes. Nahiri called Emrakul to Innistrad, and the Titan answered her summons. Emrakul's mere presence on the plane immediately drove Avacyn and her angels to destructive madness. Avacyn the Archangel, who had been created specifically to protect Innistrad and its human population, began killing humans. She became convinced that humanity itself was corrupted beyond any hope of redemption and needed to be purged completely. Sorin was eventually forced to destroy his own creation, his own daughter figure whom he had made and loved, to stop her rampage and end her suffering. The moment Avacyn died, the final barrier that had been preventing Emrakul from fully entering Innistrad collapsed completely. The Titan descended upon the plane with her full, terrible power. The transformation began immediately. Human flesh warped into masses of writhing tentacles. People transformed into horrific amalgamations of limbs and eyes that defied all natural biology. Trees became things that bled when cut. The very landscape seemed to be converting into flesh and bone. Even Innistrad's silver moon began to show disturbing signs of corruption spreading across its surface. The Gatewatch arrived on Innistrad to stop Emrakul. Confident after their victory on Zendikar, they had killed 2 Titans already, surely they could kill a third using the same methods. They were wrong about what they would face. Emrakul was different from her fellow Titans in many ways. She was more intelligent, more aware, and more capable of perceiving and interacting with individual mortal minds. When Jace attempted to enter her consciousness to attack her mentally, he found himself pulled into a mental space where Emrakul's vast awareness manifested as something his mind could barely begin to comprehend without shattering. She spoke to him there, though not in words as mortals understand them. She communicated in raw concepts that his mind desperately tried to translate into something he could process. Emrakul acknowledged that she hadn't even realized Jace existed as a separate being with his own consciousness. Individual mortal minds were so infinitesimally small compared to her cosmic awareness that she couldn't perceive them as distinct entities. She expressed something like surprise upon learning that these tiny things had their own thoughts, their own fears, their own agency and ability to choose their own actions. Then she revealed something that shocked Jace to his core. She wasn't supposed to be on Innistrad at all. This wasn't the right plane for her. Nahiri had called her to the wrong world, disrupting whatever cosmic pattern or purpose Emrakul was meant to fulfill. And then Emrakul did something that no one, least of all the Gatewatch, could have predicted or prepared for. She allowed herself to be imprisoned within Innistrad's silver moon. The Gatewatch didn't trap her there through their magic. Jace didn't bind her with his mental powers. Emrakul herself made the choice. She sealed herself within the moon voluntarily for reasons she either wouldn't or couldn't explain to the mortal minds trying to understand her actions. The last surviving Eldrazi Titan vanished into silver light, leaving behind only questions that might never be answered. Why did she surrender when she could have consumed the entire plane? What purpose did imprisoning herself serve? Was she running from something even more terrible? Was she preparing for some future event? Or was she somehow protecting the multiverse from herself and what she might become? Nobody knows the answers. Nobody may ever know. The Eldrazi are gone from Zendikar now. 2 Titans were incinerated and destroyed completely. One imprisoned herself on a completely different plane for reasons beyond mortal understanding. But the consequences of their presence continue to linger across multiple planes. Vampires still walk Zendikar, an entire race that was literally created by exposure to Eldrazi essence during the first awakening thousands of years ago. The landscape of Zendikar still bears deep scars from the Titans' feeding, places where reality itself was warped and may never fully recover. And the Hedra network that once imprisoned them lies shattered across the plane, its original purpose fulfilled and then destroyed. Ugin's warning continues to echo ominously. The Eldrazi served some purpose in the multiverse that mortals couldn't comprehend from their limited perspective. They weren't simply monsters that needed to be slain. They were part of something larger, something more ancient and complex than anyone fully understands. What happens when you permanently remove 3 cosmic entities from the fabric of reality itself? What gaps are left in the multiverse's structure? What delicate balance might have been disrupted? What consequences might manifest in a decade, a century, or a millennium? We don't know yet, and that uncertainty is terrifying. Emrakul's self-imprisonment raises equally troubling questions. She looked at Innistrad's moon and made a choice that this is where she needed to be. Not destroyed like Ulamog and Kozilek, not fleeing into the Blind Eternities to escape danger, imprisoned, voluntarily, waiting for something. But waiting for what? What does a cosmic entity like Emrakul wait for? What purpose could her imprisonment possibly serve? And what will happen when she eventually emerges from that silver prison? Because surely, eventually, she will emerge. Let me know in the comment section down below. Why do you think Emrakul imprisoned herself in the moon? And do you think that she will return? The Eldrazi may be gone as the immediate threats facing the multiverse, but their story is far from over. Somewhere within Innistrad's corrupted moon, Emrakul waits with infinite patience. And when she finally emerges, if she emerges, the entire multiverse will learn what an Eldrazi Titan's true purpose actually is. Until that day comes, we're left with the uncomfortable knowledge that the Gatewatch killed 2 beings that were older than planes themselves, beings that might have served some vital function in the multiverse's cosmic ecosystem. Nobody knows if destroying them was an act of salvation or an act of catastrophe. We won't know until the consequences finally manifest, and by then, it may be far too late to undo the damage. If you made it this far into the video, I want to say a huge thank you. I know this one was a little longer than the normal videos that we post, but if you like this length, if you like going a little deeper into the storylines behind Magic, let me know in the comments section down below. And also, if you'd let me know, what storyline do you want to see next? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell icon so you don't miss anything and you're notified when we post new videos. Until next time, we'll dive in again soon.